How the Lost Child is Created. Welcome back. I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and this is the Family Roles series. In the last video, we explored who the lost child is, the one who disappears into the background of the family system, not by accident, but by adaptation. Today's video is about how that role is formed, because the lost child doesn't just appear, they are shaped, over time. Through repeated interactions, emotional patterns, and unmet developmental needs. The title of this video is How the Lost Child is Created, and that's exactly what we're going to walk through in detail. Not with vague language or abstract theories, but with concrete psychology, relational mechanics, and pattern recognition that can help you make sense of your own story. Let's start with the root: emotionally unavailable caregivers. Every child comes into the world wired for connection. Human attachment isn't optional. It's biological. The child seeks attunement. That means not just presence, but responsiveness. When they cry, someone comforts them. When they laugh, someone mirrors the joy. When they explore, someone watches with safety. That responsiveness doesn't just make the child feel loved, it forms the blueprint for how they relate to themselves and others for the rest of their life. In families with emotionally unavailable caregivers, that blueprint is fragmented from the beginning. An emotionally unavailable caregiver is not always overtly abusive. They can appear calm, composed, even functional, but what they lack is emotional presence. They don't notice the child's internal world. They don't respond to distress. They don't encourage expression. They may provide food, shelter, structure, but they do not provide attunement. They don't ask what's wrong. They don't wonder how the child feels. They don't reflect back emotions with empathy. And so the child learns, my inner world doesn't matter here. In narcissistic or dysfunctional households, this absence is often paired with a high degree of emotional demand. The parent may expect the child to regulate themselves, minimize their needs, or support the emotional states of the adult. If the parent is emotionally volatile, the child walks on eggshells. If the parent is self-absorbed, the child shrinks to accommodate them. Over time, the child concludes that it is safer to disappear than to engage, safer to stay quiet than to ask for connection. And that's where the lost child begins. This leads to the second factor: early survival adaptations. Lost children are not born disengaged. They become that way in response to repeated relational failure. When a child expresses emotion and gets ignored, they stop expressing. When a child seeks comfort and is rejected, they stop reaching out. When a child is punished for interrupting or expressing needs, they stop asserting. These aren't personality traits. They're trauma adaptations. Silence is not natural, it's strategic. Withdrawal is not preference, it's protection. Some children adapt by becoming the high achiever. Some adapt by becoming the rebel. The lost child adapts by becoming the ghost. They avoid conflict by avoiding visibility. They avoid abandonment by avoiding connection. They avoid rejection by avoiding desire. These early strategies become default settings. The child grows up learning how to disappear in plain sight. They might be praised for being easy, quiet, low maintenance. But these traits are not signs of peace. They're symptoms of unmet needs. The third mechanism at play is the internalization of unspoken family rules. In dysfunctional systems, families run on implicit contracts. These are never said aloud, but they are enforced through emotion, reaction, and repetition. One of the most common rules in systems that produce lost children is, don't make waves. That rule can take many forms. Don't talk back. Don't upset your father. Don't bring up problems. Don't show too much emotion. Don't ask questions that make us uncomfortable. These are not guidelines, they're survival mandates. The child learns quickly what topics are off limits, what feelings must be hidden, what dynamics are never to be named. And in a narcissistic family, this rule serves a clear function. It protects the illusion of normalcy. Narcissistic parents are often invested in their image. They need to appear functional, loving, respected. Any challenge to that image, whether it's calling out neglect, expressing sadness, or naming favoritism, is perceived as a threat. So the child who stays quiet, doesn't challenge, doesn't express, becomes the least threatening. And in return, they are left alone. Not nurtured, not loved, but left alone. This dynamic may seem subtle, but its impact is profound. The child begins to equate self-erasure with safety. They internalize the belief that stillness equals security. They learn that love is not something they can access, only something they can avoid disrupting. And so they disappear not just from the family's emotional map, but from their own internal landscape. They stop forming a strong self because a strong self would make waves. And that's the one thing the system has taught them never to do. Let's now explore the impact of growing up without validation or attunement. Validation is the psychological process of having your experience acknowledged as real. Attunement is the emotional process of having your inner state mirrored and responded to. Together, these two ingredients form the basis of secure identity. When a child says, I'm scared, and the parent says, that makes sense, I'm here, the child learns that their emotion is valid and manageable. When a child says, I'm happy, and the parent celebrates with them, the child learns that joy is safe and shareable. These are not luxuries. They are developmental needs. Lost children do not get those needs met. Their experiences are not named. Their emotions are not reflected. Their struggles are not noticed. So instead of forming identity through relational feedback, they form identity through relational absence. They become defined by what they suppress, not what they express. This leads to chronic self-doubt. If no one responds to your emotions, you begin to wonder if they matter. If no one reflects your feelings, you begin to wonder if they're real. This is not just emotional insecurity, it's cognitive disorientation. Without attunement, the child lacks a mirror. And without a mirror, the self can't form. So the child becomes what the system needs them to be, invisible. And that invisibility becomes a self-concept, not because the child lacks inner depth, but because their inner depth was never drawn out, never reflected, never validated. Now let's look at how other structural factors reinforce this dynamic. Birth order plays a powerful role. In families with multiple children, parents often assign unconscious roles to manage their own emotional limitations. The firstborn may become the overfunctioner. The second may become the rebel. If those roles are filled, the third child, or whichever child is temperamentally the most quiet, may become the lost child by default. They enter a system that already has established dynamics, and to avoid conflict or redundancy, they recede. This isn't a conscious decision, it's an instinctive retreat. Temperament also plays a role. Sensitive, introverted, highly observant children are more vulnerable to becoming lost not because of weakness, but because they notice more and demand less. They pick up on cues. They sense the tension. They see which siblings get attention and which get scapegoated. And they decide often without words that the safest path is invisibility. Their natural traits, sensitivity, empathy, introspection, should be nurtured. But in a narcissistic system, they're penalized. So those traits are hidden, not expressed. Parental preference finalizes the formation. Narcissistic parents tend to focus on children who either gratify their ego or activate their projections. The golden child gets groomed. The scapegoat gets attacked. The lost child gets forgotten. Not because they are less worthy, but because they require something the parent does not give: attunement. The narcissistic parent may say the lost child is fine, easy, independent. But these words are not reflections, they're dismissals. They allow the parent to avoid accountability for emotional neglect. They get to feel like they're doing a good job while the child disappears inside themselves. Let's now summarize the key patterns that create the lost child. Emotionally unavailable caregivers who provide physical care without emotional attunement. Early attempts at connection that are ignored, rejected, or punished. Repeated reinforcement of the don't make waves rule, implicitly or explicitly. A lack of mirroring, which blocks identity development and emotion recognition. Birth order dynamics that push the child into the role by systemic necessity. Temperament traits that make invisibility a more instinctive form of self-protection. A narcissistic or emotionally immature parent who doesn't assign them a role, so they assign themselves erasure. If you recognize yourself in this pattern, you are not broken. You are responding intelligently to a system that taught you silence was safer than expression. Invisibility was safer than exposure. Self-containment was safer than disappointment. These were not choices. They were instructions. You obeyed them to survive. But survival is not the same as living. In the next video, we'll examine the signs that this role is still active in adulthood, how it shapes your relationships, your communication style, your self-perception, and your capacity to pursue visibility. But for now, the most important takeaway is this. The lost child is not born. They are formed. And once you understand how that formation happened, you can begin the reverse process. You can start forming yourself not around silence, but around sovereignty. You are not invisible. You are unseen. You are not voiceless. You are unheard. And you are not emotionless. You are unmirrored. But that ends now. Hi, I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and what you just watched is part of my signature program, the Chosen One series inside School of Soul. This series is not just a course, it's a blueprint for those who know they were different from the start. The black sheep, the scapegoat, the truth teller, the cycle breaker. Inside, you'll discover the family roles playbook, the golden child, the scapegoat, the enabler, the lost child, and how to finally step out of the part you were cast in without consent. How the black sheep becomes the goat, turning rejection into radical transformation and leadership. How to break generational curses and rewrite ancestral contracts so the pain stops with you. And how to recognize and escape modern forms of spiritual and technological targeting, from gang stalking to synthetic synchronicity. This isn't just about survival. It's about awakening, about reclaiming your voice, your lineage, and your destiny as one of the chosen ones. Click the link below to access the full series now, because the role ends the moment you decide it does, and the real script begins with you.